Hello and welcome to another special edition of ASCAP Screen Time featuring a conversation with ASCAP composer and songwriter, Amie Doherty, along with Elaine Bogan, the director of the DreamWorks animation film Spirit Untamed, and the president of Universal Pictures Film Music and Publishing, Mike Knobloch. I'm Mike Todd with the ASCAP Screen Team in membership and want to thank you all for joining us. We're truly thrilled to have each of you take a moment to chat about Amie's work on this special film and also dig into the story behind how all of you came together. So I'd like to start with Mike Knobloch, then let Mike take the conversation from there. So Mike, you're head of music at Universal Pictures, and you have such a unique perspective being responsible for the music on so many studio films every year. But what makes this conversation interesting is that you've also innovated an incubator program called the Universal Film Music Composer Initiative that you launched many years ahead of the industry, even acknowledging the need to seek out talents from a diverse minority group. I'm proud to say I met Amie in our ASCAP film scoring workshop program back in 2013, but it was in your Composer Initiative program just a few years ago where you discovered Amie's talents and championed to support her going forward. So what made you propose Amie as a candidate to score this major DreamWorks animation film, Spirit Untamed?
Just to quickly answer part of that question, our Composers Initiative at Universal is something we started a few years ago. We we jokingly say we've been doing it since before it was cool, but certainly could have started it eons ago. And the goal of the initiative is to be able to work with a community of professional composers and music makers that represent the kind of diversity in the music maker community that you see in the real world, so that we can lose the qualifiers about a female composer or an ethnically diverse composer. We can just have composers. And so we started this initiative a few years ago, and Amie was among the first group of composers selected for it, and that's really when she got put on our radar. And actually, the inception of the initiative goes hand in hand with DreamWorks becoming part of Universal. And so one of the first things that we got to do with the initiative was have some of the composers score some animated shorts that were based at DreamWorks, and Amie was selected to score an animated short called Marooned, and she knocked it out of the park for that. And that kind of kicked off a very organic progression whereby after Marooned was finished, we got to go to Abbey Road and record the score there. And it was a fantastic experience. And then very quickly after that, a live action short in the Universal family came up, which was Colin Trevorrow directing what we refer to as a piece of bridge content between the big Jurassic movies. We made this live action dinosaur short, and very organically introduced Amie among some other contenders to Colin as a composer candidate for that, and he selected her. She another fantastic job of knocking it out of the park for that short. And then about almost maybe 2 years ago, we were making a film called The High Note with Tracy Ellis Ross and Dakota Johnson. And once again, it came up from a whole conversation. I'm really abbreviating the story to get to our conversation here. But Amie was chosen as the composer for that movie. And then we started making this little horsey movie at DreamWorks called Spirit. And Elaine was at the helm of that, and in hindsight, it seems like maybe we architected some of this, but we really didn't set out initially as a column A consideration to achieve all of these first. We ended up with the first woman to ever score a DreamWorks animation film. Amie Doherty wrote her first song on a movie, which we can talk about. And it was the first time that we also put redheaded women in charge of some of the key posts on a movie as well. So that was a big first. But I could go on and on, but I think it just very kind of incrementally became an organic process whereby we got to know, we became very well aware of Amie and her capabilities as a composer, thanks in part to our initiative, but thanks in no small part to Amie's talent and dedication and perseverance and persistence. And so Elaine and Amie, I'm happy you guys are here because then I can stop talking But I think Elaine, very early on in the making of the film, we were talking about composer candidates for the film. We mentioned Amie to you, and I think maybe even earlier than usual on a typical production, you had an opportunity to meet Amie and talk to her about the goals and the objectives for the music on the film. And I think you guys just naturally hit it off. Is that fair? Do you have a better memory of it than I
Oh,
do?
no, absolutely. I think, it was right after you guys had come to us with Amie as a potential. And, I did my research, I asked around. And my very good friend, Andy Erickson, who had just come off the heels of directing the short Marooned, had nothing but the highest praise for Amie. So, why not check out, see who this Amie Doherty is. And it was a big mission for me and all of the leadership on the team at that time, because we were telling this story about empowering young females and trying to create a really diverse story that would reach a lot of different people. And what kind of storytellers would we be if we didn't try to replicate that same idea behind the scenes in as many departments as we could. So the idea that Amie was a young, up and coming, very strong voiced female, we really felt that that voice would bring a lot of authenticity and emotion, and the comedy we heard in her reels were great, and it just felt like the right way to go for the story in particular.
Uh, yeah, I mean that's how I remember it. Amie, when we met at some point early on, you told me about how you grew up in a musical storytelling family. I think I've over romanticized my notion of how you grew up, because I imagine a very like Jim Sheridan environment with a big Irish family, kind of using all the props from around the house and putting on shows in the living room, and someone's playing an instrument, someone's telling them, and then people are acting it out. And so is that, I mean, I've rewritten your history to suit my notion of it, but is that kind of how you came to?
But no, that actually is pretty accurate. Yeah, my mom's family in particular, she's one of 10, so I have 4 billion cousins, and everyone's very musical. Everyone plays at least one instrument or sings, and yeah, when we have family get-togethers, it's we sit around and sing songs, and everyone plays instruments and stuff. So yeah, I definitely grew up being surrounded by all sorts of music, everything. But my mom in particular would write these original musicals and would have the kids in the local schools like perform them, or Christmas concerts or stuff. So from from the age of like 9 or 10 or something, I would just be thrown in behind the piano while she was chaotically directing this stuff, and I would play along with the songs. But we always joked that you would just see her head pop out from behind the curtain, and she'd be like, play some Farsi music, because something horrific had happened on stage and we just needed to keep it going. So I was kind of live scoring these plays when I was a kid, and I hated it at the time, but looking back, I actually think it was kind of the roots of it all. So you're not far wrong.
Do those kind of chops you still flex those muscles in these kinds of situations where you're doing musical storytelling?
I think so, because when I do go to write themes and stuff, like even with Fearless, I do sit down at the piano. That's where I go back to my own, I get away from the computer and go and like sit at the piano, and just me and the piano, like the good old days. Yeah, it all kind of stems from there.
Very cool. So early on in the process of making this movie, I know one of the first things, Amie, that you got tasked with doing, or I don't know if you specifically got tasked with it, but there was definitely a conversation among the team that a lullaby was needed sort of early in animation. And in order, sort of this like chicken and egg thing, in order for the sequence to be made and the story to get on track, production wise, a lullaby needed to be created. And I think initially it started as just an incidental thing for Eiza Gonzalez's character, for the mother, as a very small role in the film. And then it kind of snowballed into a piece of music that had a bigger role on the film. So tell us about the song Fearless and how that came about.
Yeah, that was the first kind of task I had, I guess, when I joined the team. And I had read the script, and I had met with Elaine and Annie, our co-director, and Karen Foster, our amazing producer. And they had explained to me, the opening of the film, which changed many times, Elaine, right? Like, I think it was still quite, it was still being worked out, because I came on quite early compared to how like when composers usually come on. So they just gave me this brief, and we just talked for a really long time about what this lullaby meant and the message behind it that Milagro would be, you know, hoping to impart to her lovely daughter. And you know, she's this fierce woman who does like basically is a stunt woman essentially on horseback, and is fearless. And I'm sure that word fearless came up many times in our conversation, but I just remember getting off that conversation and just like brainstorming on a piece of paper, like every word I could think of that this woman, you know, wanted to impart to her daughter, you know, bravery and strength and courage and all of that. And then I just went to the piano and started working out ideas. But yeah, it did initially start as a lullaby. So I wrote the kind of 30-second smaller version of the lullaby, and then just was inspired by what they had told me about the opening scene, which I hadn't even seen yet because it didn't exist. And
neither had we, Amie.
yeah, you saw it in your head, Elaine.
It's all up there.
So yeah, I went and wrote kind of the opening 4 or 5 minutes of the film with no visual, you know, getting into the festival, and then Milagro singing the lullaby to Lucky. And the embarrassing part was that I recorded myself singing it, thinking that only
She's a lovely singer.
No, I sound like
I have the demo right here. We were going to play it as part of this conversation.
Oh, can we listen to it while we see some baby photos of Amie then?
Yeah, exactly.
quit this business.
Oh,
And
but
I thought it would only be you guys would hear it, like Elaine and Eddie and Karen. And next thing they were like, we sent it to, you know, Margie, the president of DreamWorks, and we sent it over to Mike Knobloch and his team. I was mortified, but it did the job, I guess.
well, I remember that launching you on that being no small task. And when we had left that conversation, I was like, should that have been Amy's first assignment on this thing? Like, oh, what have we done to her, that poor woman? Because it wasn't for us, it wasn't just a 30-second lullaby that was going to be included in the opening of the film. It was a thematic piece of music, melody, score, storytelling piece that came back. It did.
Did it start that way when starting with the conversation about a lullaby? Do you think it was architected, so to speak, from that inception to be that thematic and prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, whether we communicated that up front well enough or not, we always knew that opening song of Milagro singing to Lucky was going to come back into Lucky's story multiple times throughout the movie. Not only was it going to come back, it needed to come back in different forms and different tones and different styles. We needed that song to come back and be a scared, insecure moment when Lucky is trying to find the strength to remember what her mother told her. We needed it to come back as a big, exciting, celebratory moment at the end of the movie where Jim rustles up the courage to remember and sing the song. And it took on many different versions and became such an important part of the actual storytelling that without that song in there now, we wouldn't have as much of a story. You know what I mean? And that was Amy's first task coming into the crew. But I do remember Amie came back with that first pass after a couple weeks or something. And we all listened to it and we were like, yep, that there it is. Mm.
I think that yup was so kind of deeply affirmative that it led to not just the uses you're talking about, but then even ultimately having Isabella Merced, who plays the main character in the film, and having Asa, who plays her mom, having them record a version, you know, a Spanglish, English and Spanish version together, and then also doing an English version separate from that for the soundtrack. You know, it's pretty much a whole series of uses through the evolution of the song that we really didn't leave anything on the table that we didn't do with it, right? It's a testament to how good the song is, I think.
Thank you. It kind of grew legs. I mean, I don't think I knew when I wrote it, like, I loved the idea of it being the opening song that the Milagro sings to Lucky, and then using that as the melody throughout the scores, because we basically, spoiler alert, don't see Milagro again after the opening scene. So I just love the idea of that melody being, you know, strong. And when Lucky's alone in the movie and we want to feel like her mom's, you know, looking down on her and still taking care of her, that hopefully the melody could basically be Milagros' character, and it kind of brings her back into the film and in those key scenes.
Yeah. Speaking of thematic material, just out of curiosity, Elaine, when you started working on the film, obviously Spirit's part of a DreamWorks franchise. There's a movie that Hans Zimmer scored, and there's a TV series. Was there ever a conversation about using any of the existing themes of either Hans's material or anything from for the show? And was that ever a conversation between the two of you?
I think right up front, part of my task was to create a world that felt like a new generation of Spirit. So going back and utilizing other music and other score from previous parts of the franchise, I don't think was ever something we talked about. What was important though was that we still felt like we were honoring what the TV series show creators had given us, and that it felt like it was part of the same universe, yet something new and of its own. And I'm not sure, Amie, I'm not sure if you ever did at a time go and listen to some of the music in the first film or the TV series, and
Yeah,
like, was that part of your approach?
I remember that was what I asked you guys that question when we first met, just to have a chat. Like, were we planning on, or were you guys planning on like hinting at that, or was that because that score, Hans Zimmer's score, is so fantastic. It's an amazing score. So I was like, are we going to use a theme from that movie? But yeah, it was very clear that this was a new kind of IP, not a new IP, but like a new universe that needed its own kind of sound. We did use the theme song from the TV show in a comedic way on the train, and funnily enough, it was in every movie there's one cue that just, you know, right until the bitter end goes on, and funnily enough it was that one. We had, I think, like 12 versions of it and yeah, you can just hear it. It's kind of subtly in the background of the train. We used it as source, so that's kind of an Easter egg for the hardcore fans.
Sure. There's that Easter egg. And then there's some other highlights as well, right? For when the score started coming together, there were things that kind of also kind of evolved organically from both working with the temp and Elaine, some of what you were trying to achieve creatively, and some things like that led to Robin Pecknell from Fleet Foxes, for example, did some vocalizations on the score. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was when we had first completed the first version of the full movie up on reels in storyboards. And we went through song after song of looking for something that fit perfectly into the scene of Lucky bringing Spirit and the herd back into the wild at the end of the movie. There were so many songs in there, I can't even remember how many, but I remember driving into the LA Equestrian Center on my way to do my thing with Ziggy Stardust, and that song came onto my playlist, the Ragged Wood song by Fleet Foxes. And right away, the light bulb went off, and I texted Daniel and Karen from the car, we got to try this in the cut, please. So we put it in there, and that became the anthem of that scene. It was in there at the beginning, and it stayed there ever since. You know, I never imagined we would be able to actually keep that song in the film. I always knew one day would come where we would replace it with either Amie's score or a new song or something like that. But when Amie first came onto the project, apparently the inspiration and vibe of Fleet Foxes was number one on her list as far as, you know, what are we all thinking when we think about the tone and the sound of this movie. So, you know, those worlds kind of collided and everything kind of evolved from there.
Yeah,
Amie, was that empowering or limiting to say, oh no, there's this song and they love it and I got to match it or beat it?
No, because I didn't even know. I mean, at that stage, it was just a really crazy moment on that call, because I had just read the script and I hadn't heard from anyone what the musical inspirations were or anything. And I had just been making notes while I was reading the script about what I thought, just ideas to bring to the table for the meeting. And I get on the call and Elaine mentions the Fleet Foxes, and I'm like, okay, like you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I lifted up my notebook and at the top of the notebook it said Fleet Foxes. Like it was just this crazy moment. So it just from that moment onwards, like I guess it was empowering because I just felt like we were so on the same page and we, you know, both were huge Fleet Foxes fans. And to me it was, I just love that tight harmony that, you know, that they have in a lot of their songs. And I thought it was a cool way to kind of modernize that Old West score and kind of bring it into a modern era. And then, yeah, Mike, you and Angela just made that happen. And you know, they sent over this, you guys sent the stuff to Robin, the demos, and he decided to come on board and we kept it a secret from Elaine. Yeah, but that was a pinch me moment for sure. And he was so incredible. He did a really, really amazing job.
Sure.
Well, what I thought was great was the work that you did to incorporate that sound into the thematic score for Spirit. Every time we see Spirit, it becomes his voice, and
Right.
it tells us a lot about what Spirit's going through emotionally because we can hear that carry through. Brilliantly done.
Brilliantly done. All right. Well, we're going to wrap in a second. Amie, I have one more question for you in the spirit, no pun intended, but in the spirit of the ASCAP talk that we're doing and imparting some wisdom. What do you think, in just aside from being from a super creative Irish family, what are some important or impactful working experience that you had, whether it's orchestrating, assisting other composers, or just what experiences along the way help best equip and prepare you for the opportunity to score a major motion picture like Spirit?
Well, you know, funnily enough, I actually did the ASCAP film scoring workshop, which is just the most incredible experience, back in 2013 when I just moved here. And each composer gets assigned a scene, and it's like a 3-minute piece of music, 2 to 3 minutes. And my scene was from a DreamWorks film. It was from How to Train Your Dragon. And I was terrified. And we had like 3 weeks, I think, to write that 1 3-minute piece of music. And yeah, I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. But and it was just so crazy that, you know, a few years later, like, you know, when you guys hired me for this film, and I was thinking back on that time and just thinking it's so crazy that, you know, that it all kind of began there. And now here I am scoring a DreamWorks film, which is crazy. But yeah, you know, that workshop, and then I did do the Sundance workshop also. And then obviously the Universal Composers Initiative has just been huge. So I feel like those experiences for me, I tell every composer I know, like apply to all of these things. It's how people like me, you know, get my music or get our music in front of people like you, Mike, who can really make a difference. And, you know, and you have been a total champion of mine, and, you know, you're the reason we're on this Zoom here. So I super appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you. I think, Elaine, you made a beautiful film. Amie, you brought such a wonderful kind of character and depth and dimension to it with your music. I'm also really proud that in a very, again, I keep using the word organic, but in a very organic way, this incredible team of women, the two of you, Karen producing, AG, who's a producer, came on and produced multiple versions of a couple of songs in the film. The songwriters who wrote a couple of the other songs in the film are really wonderful, what became a family of some very, very talented women behind this film in a way that made it really an honor and a pleasure, and something that I'm really proud to have been a part of.
Thanks again. Really, I have this big grin on my face every time we do these things, but this is so cool to hear you guys talk and really get behind the scenes. So yeah, with that, we will look for you on another edition of ASCAP Screen Time, and we'll see you soon at the movies, maybe.